Well, I can't even begin to tell you how excited we have been for this series. We have been collecting pumpkins. We went out and got hay bales for our photo booth that's going to be traveling from site to site. We've been cutting up trucks. We've been gathering prizes. We've been creating challenges. We've been doing everything we can to make this next 4 weeks a really great 4 weeks. And I want to just take a moment to welcome everybody online live, wherever you are in the world right now. Those of you at the warehouse and at the fire hall, people watching during the week, it's so great to have you. And of course, everybody here at the factory. We get to be one church all meeting together. So for this series, we decided that an old 1951 Chevrolet 1300 truck would be our mascot. And the reason we did that is because of a few reasons. One is the old truck is really, to us, a symbol of strength. In fact, this truck was built for the Canadian market specifically just after World War II, and the advertisement said, battleship construction. I mean, these things were made of 3 times thicker metal than our vehicles today. They were strong, they were meant to last, they were built to last, and what was built to last. And that's one of the reasons we wanted it as our mascot. Another reason is that for 68 years, this old truck has been pelted with rain and sleet and snow and storms and the baking sun, and yet it has lasted the test of time. And we thought, you know what? That's just like so many of our families. We feel like we walk into so many different storms as families, and yet over time we want our families to be strong and robust and be able to last the test of time. Another reason is that this old truck was a workhorse. On the Canadian farms 68 years ago, it was a workhorse, and we don't want our Stronger Families workshop just to be about theories and concepts. We want there to be practicality. We want to do work together and actually practically build our families strong. And then finally, this old truck really kind of takes us back to basics. And we want to go back to the basics. You know, the family today is experiencing so many complexities and so many challenges. But it doesn't mean that building a strong family has to be complex or only for the elite. We can all build a strong family, and there's something very beautiful. There's a certain beauty and confidence that comes in simplicity. So that's another reason we thought that this old truck would be a great mascot for us. Now, speaking of going back to basics, I don't know that we could get any more basic than going back to the book of Genesis, where it all began, and the first couple of chapters in the book of Genesis. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to go back there to discover what I believe are some incredibly essential and very powerful principles for building your family, regardless of what your family is even looking like. So if you're new to Riverwood this weekend at any of our sites or here, you need to know that we as a church have committed to reading through the Bible, the whole Bible, actually in 1,000 days, a chapter a day for 1,000 days. And we're in the book of Genesis right now. Now, I realize that's the first book of the Bible, but it's our 20th book. We're 250 days in. And if you would like to join us on this journey, all the information for this reading challenge, chapter a day, is on our website and on our Riverwood app, and the Bible is there. You can read it right there as well. And we'd love for you to join us. But as I was reading along with our church this last week in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, there was a couple of verses that really popped out for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, we need to pay attention to this in terms of building stronger relationships and stronger families. So the first verse that really leapt out to me was Genesis chapter 2, the last verse of that chapter. And it said this: "Now the man and the wife were both naked, but they felt no shame." Now, for those of you that are visual thinkers like myself, this is a problem verse, right? Because it conjures up all sorts of imagery. Push that aside for a minute and stick with me, okay? I want you to look at another part of the verse. Yes, they were buck naked, but they felt no shame. And I found this word shame to be very, very interesting. As we were reading back, it turns out that out of all the emotions that God could have talked about, on the pinwheel of emotions, there's over 100 emotions that psychologists have identified. Out of all the emotions, the very first one that he identifies and talks about is shame. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. I don't think that's an accident. I think there's something here that we need to be paying attention to. I think it's very, very interesting that he began to talk about this. Now, in the very next chapter, as we read on, what has just happened is Eve and Adam have just taken the forbidden fruit. Of course, you know the story, and sin has entered into the human experience. And right after that, we read these words: "At that moment, their eyes were opened, and they suddenly felt shame." at their nakedness. So they sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. Now, call me crazy, but I do not think that this was random. I don't think God just took the pinwheel of emotion and spun it and then threw a dart at it and said, I'm going to talk about this emotion. I think he very, very specifically identified the very first human emotion in the Bible as being shame for a reason. Now, we need to actually take a few moments to define shame, but before we do, let me just kind of give you where we're heading. I believe that God was saying, if you want to have a stronger family, you're going to have to figure out shame. If you want to grow stronger kids, you're going to have to pay attention to this whole shame thing. If you want to have a stronger marriage, you are going to definitely need to understand and know how to work with shame, because it's an essential virus that is going to try and take down every relationship in your life. If you simply want to be a healthier person at work or in a family or on a team or wherever you are going to need to understand shame, because shame was the first emotion to show up on the scene when sin entered the human experience, and it is the basic virus that is going to try to destroy any of your relationships. Now, we would do really well to actually define shame, and to define shame, instead of going to the dictionary or to the psychologist, I want to go back to the Bible. You see, the Old Testament was written in ancient Hebrew. And when you look at the ancient Hebrew words, sometimes we learn things that maybe we didn't understand before. We understand a little bit more of the essence of these words. So in that first verse, in chapter 2, the word shame is bush in ancient Hebrew. Bush. Now, what does it mean? It means, this might feel a little bit unrelated, but it means to pale. Literally, it means to pale, to dry up, or dehydrate. Now, let's work with that a little bit. When somebody in your family, a kid, a spouse, a friend, a coworker at work, or maybe it is in your family, your brother, your sister, your parents, when they feel shame, they begin to pale, they begin to dry up, and their soul and their psyche begin to wither. They begin to decrease. And then what happens? What happens when you begin to feel shame and you begin to lose the color of your character and you begin to pale and decrease? What happens? You want to cover it up. You want to hide. And in fact, in chapter 3, Genesis 3, that word for cover is hagor. And again, it's a very interesting word. It means an apron. We read it in our English version as the fig leaves that we're covering. It means an apron. It means to cover up. Literally, it means armor. When we experience shame that causes us to pale and to dry and to dehydrate and to decrease, the first thing we want to do is cover it up and build armor around ourselves so that other people cannot see that shame. When I was in grade 9, I do not remember if somebody said something to me, if somebody was picking on me, if somebody made a comment, or if it was just my own psyche, because so many times our shame comes from our own thoughts in our own heads. But whatever it was, I remember so distinctly the armor that I put in place as I think back now. I didn't realize it then. But you see, I had this sense that I was not good enough. How many of us grow up with that sense that we're not good enough? And I had the sense that I was not good enough. In fact, more specifically, I thought in grade 9, my hands were too big and my legs were too skinny, and therefore no girl would ever like me. That's what was going through my head. So you know what I did all summer? I walked around with my hands in my pockets so nobody could see them. And I walked around in Regina, 38 degrees Celsius, with either my bell-bottom jeans or my bell-bottom corduroys on all summer long. I rode my bike around the neighborhood with long pants all summer long. And my mom would say, you do realize it's going to be 39 degrees out today here in Regina. Why are you wearing long pants? Oh, I just think it's more cool to wear long pants. There was nothing cool about it. I was sweating like a pig. It was horrible. But I was hiding. I was hiding what I thought were my big hands and my skinny legs. And that's what happens when we feel shame, we end up hiding. UBC professor Hillary McBride says that she often goes into a counseling session and she'll ask the people, have you ever seen yourself? Do you know what you look like? And she says they often look back at her as if she's the one who needs counseling. And they say, well, of course I know what I look like. Of course I've seen myself. I happen to get ready in the mirror every single day. And then she says, you know what? Actually, I want to suggest that you have never seen yourself. The only sense of who you are comes from a reflection and from what you see in a mirror. You have never been able to get outside of your body and actually look back in and see yourself. You've never seen yourself. You've only seen a reflection of yourself. And then when she fully has their attention, she goes on to say, the reality is this: other people in your life are the mirror in which you see yourself. You only know yourself through other people's words or through other people's actions. You have no idea what you actually look like apart from the mirror from which you see reflected in other people. And then she goes on and she says, but here's the kicker. The kicker is that every single one of us has a mirror, but for every one of us, our mirror is broken. The reflection you see of yourself is incredibly broken. So what do? We take the hagor, the apron, the covering, the armor, and we try to cover up our shame. Every single one of us has this tendency. It's the most basic, primal emotion of the human experience, is to try to cover up our shame so nobody can see the cracks. Brene Brown is a PhD researcher, professor from Houston, and she is known worldwide now as kind of the preeminent researcher in shame. And she says that people usually reach for one of three hagors, one of three armor coverings, one of three aprons to try and cover up their shame. You might want to enter these in on the Riverwood app on the notes page, or write them down, or just come back to this message to remember them, because you are going to need to know this in order to have a strong family. These are fascinating. Here's the first one: moving against shame, trying to gain control and power over others by aggression. Do you realize that the nastiest emails I have ever received, and I've received a few, I read them, and I don't get the sense that that person is just a mean, angry, grumpy, critical person. Often I will read some of the nastiest emails, and I get the sense they're trying to cover up their own sense of inadequacy and their own shame. For those of you that are married, that last fight you had about which way the toilet paper goes on the wall there, and there is a right way and a wrong way, we know this, or that fight about who left the coffee cup partly full in the car and it made a mess, or who said that comment that really offended me. That latest fight that you had, if you're married, probably wasn't fueled and energized by a roll of toilet paper or by a coffee cup. It was probably fueled and energized by somebody trying to cover up their shame, their inadequacy. You were getting to a place where you were beginning to peek at the cracks in the mirror, and that other person said, no way, you are not peeking at those cracks. I will not give you any ammunition in my life. And they begin to get aggressive. Aggression is one of the ways that we cover up our shame. Secondly, the second covering, moving away from shame by withdrawing, keeping secrets, lying, or avoiding. When your husband, when your teenager, when your wife withdraws from you, it's not because they're a jerk. It's not because they don't know how to communicate to people. It's not primarily because they don't like you. It's probably, most likely, because somewhere along the way, their shame covering was beginning to come off, and you could see the cracks in their life, and they went, no, you are not going to see the cracks in my life. So they began to withdraw and get away from what was causing the cover to come off. Thirdly, she says, moving towards shame by seeking approval and belonging. I look back in my own life. I like to be introspective, try and figure myself out, kind of play psychologist in my own life. And when I do that, I realize that I don't have workaholic tendencies. I don't have push myself to the utter breaking point tendencies simply because I grew up with a strong work ethic. There were moments in my life, and I don't have time to tell you about them today, but there were moments in my life when I said, that shame, what I just experienced now, will never happen to me again, and I will earn people's approval, and I will earn my belonging by being the hardest worker in the room. And often we actually move towards the shame by trying to be and cover up our brokenness and our flawedness and our defectiveness and our sense that I am unlovable by actually trying to seek approval and belonging. Brene Brown goes on to say this: shame is the unspoken epidemic that is the secret behind many forms of broken behavior. Shame is an epidemic in our society, and we need to understand how it affects us and how it affects the way we're parenting, the way we're working, the way that we are looking at each other. Okay, so that's a little bit of a flyover, a brief explanation or definition of what shame is. What we want to do in this series for the next 4 weeks is give you tools. We want to give you practical tools and assignments to help build stronger families. So if I was to look and reach into the toolbox of how to actually combat shame, here's the first tool that I would pull out. And it's this: number one, include God in your strategy. Now, for those of you that are new to faith or maybe aren't of a religious nature, and you're sitting there going, oh, I knew you were going to pull the God thing here. Listen to this. This is really fascinating. God was the first one, not Brene Brown or Hillary McBride, wasn't the first one to talk about shame. God was the first one to talk about shame at the very beginning of the Bible. He didn't just spin the pinwheel of emotion. He named it and said, you will struggle with this. This will be an issue all the way through your life. But then listen to what he says in the New Testament book of Hebrews. This is the coaching. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, taking my sin upon himself, scorning its shame. Scorning its shame. He scorns shame and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. I love this. I find it fascinating. Jesus despises shame. Shame entered into our lives in the human experience, but Jesus belittles shame. He mocks shame. He ridicules shame. He scorns shame. He will not allow shame to cause him to cover up. Instead, he went to great lengths to expose himself, his love for you. And he said, I'm going to scorn and despise shame. You know, through the Bible, I can't think of a better anti-shame message book than the Bible. Through the Bible, we learn messages like this: you are a masterpiece of God's own design. You were worth God dying for. You were created with purpose and meaning and tremendous value. I mean, that's right there in the Bible. We get all these millions of messages that say you're not loved, you're not good, you're flawed, you'll never be good for anybody. And the Bible comes and says, no, you are created with purpose and meaning and tremendous value. The Bible says that there are horrible voices that will come against us, accusing us and trying to bring us down with shame, saying you are not good enough. But God says, I'm going to put my son in between those voices and you as a protector, reminding you of your value. If you've never hooked up with God, let me suggest to you, he's got some tremendous answers to the problems that we face. And if we can help you do that over these next 4 weeks, we'd love to do that. Number one, include God in the strategy. Number two, remember, everyone's mirror is broken and everybody tries to cover it up. Your mirror is broken and you try to cover it up. Your kids' mirror is broken. And when you begin to look behind that mirror, they will try and cover it up with aggression, or by moving towards it and earning, or by withdrawal. Everybody's mirror is broken, and we all build armor to try to cover it up. Now, that is some very, very dangerous knowledge I just shared with you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to see in your spouse or in your kids or somebody, you're going to see some aggression. You're going to see them withdrawing. You're going to see them trying to earn approval. And you're going to go, hold it, I learned about this. I know what this is. You're just trying to cover up your shame. Na, poo-poo, caught you. Okay? Don't do that. Okay? Don't do that. That will not help the situation. Okay? You can think it. You can think, wow, this aggression right now coming from my spouse, I wonder if this is what he was talking about, trying to cover up the shame. This withdrawing I see in my kid, I wonder if this is what he was talking about, trying to cover up the shame. You can think it in your head, but please be smarter than to name it out and to call it out. Instead, here's what you need to do. You need to use your words to instill value in them. You see, every single one of us have received millions of messages that we are not good enough, that we are not strong enough, that we are not smart enough, that we are unlovable. If people knew the real us, they would not love us. We've all received millions of messages like that. Your job in your family is to use your words to counterbalance those messages. And since they're ahead of us by 1,000,000, we got a long way to go. You got to use a lot of words to counterbalance this. But I encourage you to speak value, to speak affirmation, to speak words of building up into the people around you. Some of you are looking at me right now like you have no clue what I'm talking about. And here's why. Let me just call it out. Here's why. Because all of us have an industrial-sized vacuum sucking in affirmation, sucking in words of value, sucking in, please build me up, please love me, please affirm me. And we have such a vacuum sucking that in that we forget that we are somebody else's mirror. And we need to counterbalance their brokenness. So I encourage you, I challenge you, here's a practical tool. Use your words. But don't just say, hey, you know what? You look good today. Okay, that's good. That's a nice compliment. You know, if you walk up to your husband and say, hey, you don't smell too bad today. Okay, that's a nice compliment. Don't get me wrong. It's good, okay? To say, hey, thanks for doing such and such. That's good. But that's not going to be what I'm talking about. If you are going to build somebody up and counterbalance the millions of messages that they've received, you need to start with 2 words. Are you ready for them? 2 words. First one, you. Second one, are. You are. You are. You see, here's what happens. The message that comes to our heads that says, you made a mistake, that causes guilt. The messages that come to our head that say, you are a mistake, that's shame. You are a mistake. And you need to counterbalance those messages, the millions that we all receive, with words of, you are. To your kids, you might say, you are so smart. Last time you got a D, now you got a C. You're so smart. That's awesome. And you build up. You might want to say to your wife, you are so beautiful. You are so thoughtful. You are so amazing. You are so truly wonderful. If you're married, you might want to say to your husband, my, you are so adventurous. Instead of, why did you do that? My, you're so adventurous. You're an amazing fixer. You can fix anything. Only say that if they actually can. If they can't fix anything, that won't work. But you are so protective of your family. You are so sexy. Now, this one, even if it's not true, you can say it, okay? Because we will overlook your little white lie. You know, it doesn't even matter. Just keep saying it. You are so sexy. You are so sexy. We all long for words to build us up. Don't just compliment the easy stuff. Use the you are and begin to talk to the identity. Number 3, practice empathy. We don't have a lot of time to go into this. Let me just tell you a little tool that Carolyn and I use. We will often use the words, if I could get inside your head and look at this situation, here's what I would see. So we'll be talking and we'll be in a tension point and I'll stop and I'll say, okay, in my head, I say, if I was to climb inside of Carolyn's head and look out of her eyes knowing everything I know about how she sees life, how would I see this situation? Oh, now I see why she's upset. She'll climb inside of my head and she'll look through my eyes and say, I don't understand why you would want to go after that old car or that old motorbike or why you would spend so many hours fixing that. But she climbs inside my head and she goes, oh, I get it. Practice empathy. Brene Brown says this, if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially. Secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. The antidote for empathy, for shame is empathy. And number 4, tool number 4 in the toolbox, tell your story. Tell your story. What we do is we try to cover our shame and we try to cover our brokenness. But here's what you need to realize. Every single person has a cracked mirror, and your cracks are your story. Your cracks are your story. You don't have to cover them up. You can tell your story. In fact, Brene Brown goes on and she says this: when we deny the story, it defines us. Oh, I love this. But when we own the story, we can write a brand new ending. You've heard it around here so many times. What is spoken can be broken. Shame is a bottom dweller that is allergic to light. Shame are the chains, and your story is the bolt cutter. If you'll just tell your story. So here's what we're going to do throughout this entire series for 4 weeks is we are going to reveal our cracks, and we are going to tell our story. And to begin with, I would love to introduce you to the Bergen family.
Hello, we're the Bergen family, and this is my sister Peyton. This is my papa, aka Grandpa, aka Jeff, and this is my Nana, aka Grandma, aka Leah.
Well, we have 2 grown kids. Our daughter's 28 and our son is 26, and we have 5 grandchildren.
Gabby we got when she was 1.
Really?
6 months. And then Peyton pretty much when she was about just after she was born. The reason that we ended up with them was our daughter has made some life choices and gone down a path that is not a healthy situation. There's a meth crisis in our city, and she has got caught up in it.
I think early on, when you talk about shame, not that we felt shame, but you're, in a sense, you're a little bit embarrassed that your kids can't take care of their own kids. But you know what? As time went on, we realized that God is bigger than this whole situation, and we can't feel shame about our daughter, about the situation. We have to, be here for the kids and show them that God is bigger than the thing that we're all so sad about. Is that we're sad about our daughter. They're sad about their mom, that she can't be part of our lives.
As a father, you go through times of what did I do wrong? Is there something else I could have done? What did we miss? It takes a while to get through that. But when you realize that, and for me it took realizing that something else got a hold of her, then we could talk about it more. Because I didn't talk about it for a long time because I thought I had done something wrong. And then when you get friends around and you start talking about it, the light is on it now, and you can't, and the weight isn't there anymore.
One of the biggest challenges is talking to the girls about the situation. Jeff and I had talked about always wanting to be honest with them, but at the right age and at the right time. And so that was a challenge, figuring out when they were ready, when we had the right words to, explain it to them.
Gabby's 8 years old, coming up to 9. How do you communicate an addict's lifestyle? Because she wanted to know she more and more wanted to know where's her mom. And her mom hasn't been around for a long time. So what we did was we sat down, and in the news all the time is the crisis in our city. And so her and I sat down and I recorded some of them, and we watched them together. And she learned what meth does to people before we started to talk to her about where her mom's at. She had a very interesting response, and she needed to talk to her mom right away because she could get her to stop.
My first phone call with Mama, I said about how I wanted her to stop and how I was gonna go speak to the government about it, and I also said how much I missed her, and every time, sometimes, most of the time when I speak to her, she starts crying because she misses me so much. And Nana and Papa tell me when I start to cry about Mom, they tell me that she still loves us. She still loves us. It's just she just needs to get help. And then I've been asking some other questions on where and how to get help.
We are a family, and it's sometimes hard to explain that to the kids, their friends, other people. But even though we're Nana and Papa, we're really Mom and Dad.
Family means that how they love and hope. It means love and hope. Yeah. I'm so glad to be a part of this family, and I'm glad that I have sisters and brothers, and that Nana and Papa are here for us, and we're just one big happy family.
So what you just experienced in the Stronger Families lab this morning is what happens to you on the inside when somebody else removes the armor and shows you their cracks. And were you disgusted? Were you put off like, oh, I don't want to see those cracks? Or did you feel honored to be brought into their story? And did it even maybe help you go, I've got some cracks of my own maybe that I should be showing? The enemy of your soul will try to convince you that you should keep the cover on your cracks. But the way to rid shame out of your life is to tell your story. So the practicalities for today, actually, let me just remind you what Brene Brown said. She said this: if you trade your authenticity or the vulnerability of telling your story for safety, because we don't want anybody else to see our story, you may experience the following. This is a PhD doctor telling you this: anxiety, depression, eating disorders, addiction, rage, blame, resentment, and inexplicable amounts of grief. That's what you can expect if you continue to cover up your shame. However, the antidote for shame is include God in your strategy. Remember, everybody's got a broken mirror and is going to try and cover it up by 3 different ways. Practice empathy, getting inside somebody else's head and looking at life, and tell your story. Now, we told you that we want this to be a very practical and fun series, and so we have a family challenge for you. And here's family challenge number 1 for week 1, okay? Here's what we want you to do. Whether you're a couple, whether you're a bunch of friends that are going to form a little family just for this challenge, or whether you can find your family and get them together, we want you to go out and take a picture or a selfie or whatever of your family with a pumpkin. Okay? That's your challenge. That's your big challenge, okay? Post it to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter with the hashtag RWStrongerFamilies. What we're going to do is, across all our sites next weekend, we're going to take all the hashtagged posts, and we're going to put them together, and we're going to choose one for a more special, larger prize, and we're going to choose that for next weekend, okay? So go out, find yourself a pumpkin, get your family together, have a family activity, and take a picture, post it, hashtag RWStrongerFamilies, and we're going to draw on that next weekend. Now, at the beginning of our session today, I told you about this old truck, and how this old truck for 68 years withstood rain and wind and sleet and snow and the summer's baking sun and storms, and it lasted the test of time. But like this old truck, many of us can identify today because we feel like we're in one of those storms as a family or as an individual. And so what we want to do is we want to take just a moment to respond with a song. And this song it actually comes out of some stories out of the Bible where people were found in these big storms, or people were found in the fiery furnace. And the reason they survived, every one of them survived, and the reason they survived was because they recognized that they were not alone, that God was right with them. And so we want to close our session and declare together that our God is a powerful God, and that the best of his power is experienced when he is right beside us in life's storm. So I'm going to sign off to the other sites. Have a great rest of you. We can't wait to do week 2 of Stronger Families next weekend.